car. Talla prață finuețe o me fino car. Talla prață finuețe o me fino car.
Unfortunately, the value of an umbrella in Badagry was 40 human beings.
Say that one more time.
The value of an umbrella was 40 human beings.
So for 40 people,
Yes, this umbrella.
you get an umbrella.
In
Come
Badagry,
on.
that's the value.
Who established these values? Like, who thought it was a good idea, or that the value of 40 human beings for an umbrella was a good idea, or sound business, made business sense? Who came up with this?
No, the idea of the umbrella. If you study the Arabs, the origin of this umbrella, of the use of umbrella, did not begin in Europe. It was in Asia and Arabia. In Asia and Arabia, they were using it, and the first slaves, they were sold to the Portuguese, to the Italians, they were sold to the Spanish, other places in Europe where the slaves were sold by the Arabs. The slaves were sold by the Arabs to the Europeans. Okay, and they have the knowledge of some of these things. But you see, when the Europeans began to deal directly, the Portuguese came, they were dealing with West Africans. They used some of the knowledge they have with the Arabs to deal, because even the slave trade that they came and they established, they learned it from the Arabs. Okay, but you see, they made the chiefs, they made the emir, they made the kings feel like they are more important than the ordinary man on the street, and that they needed something to differentiate them from the ordinary man on the street, and they came with the idea of the umbrella. Okay, and of course they placed value on the umbrella, and they made the umbrella to be very, very valuable and important.
I'm still in shock that for one umbrella you would sell 40 people for one umbrella. I'm still in shock over that.
They practice what they call trade by barter. Trade by barter. Unfortunately, those who set the price were not the Africans. It's like oil business, oil and gas business.
Right. But I'm under the impression that the African would think that 40 people for an umbrella is not a fair trade. You know what I mean? I would think.
It depends on, for instance, the value of an umbrella was in Badagry was 40 slaves. The value of a bottle of alcohol was 10 slaves. Okay, 10 slaves. The value of a Dane gun was 40 slaves in Badagry. A ceramic bowl was 10 slaves in Badagry. The big cannon gun, which was like the bomb that time, the big one was used in exchange for 100 slaves. The small one for 40 slaves. But you see, they placed, the Europeans were the ones who placed value on some of these items. I was trying to tell you that.
So they didn't want to negotiate back then.
Of course, they would have negotiated. They would have negotiated. Okay, but I think it's all born from opinion. I may be wrong, but I think it still has to do with greed to an extent. Okay, or maybe selfishness to an extent. But you must understand that they were not the one they were calling the shot. In the world today, people who want to buy the oil, who want to buy petrol, they are the one who set the price of petrol.
Correct.
It is not those who own the oil, who owns the petrol, that determines how much they sell the petrol. I think it's the same old story system. It's this old.
The same systems in place, right?
That is still on ground.
But I mean, Africans are still getting the raw end of the deal. They're not. It's not a good deal. The system's not a good.
It's not a good deal.
It doesn't benefit Africans. But my question is, why do we continue to allow ourselves to be exploited?
That is why, for instance, we talk about the Imale slave revolt in Brazil. Now, the Imale slave revolt in Brazil. Now, how did they come about that word Imale? Now, in Yoruba land, I tell people it was not the Fulanis who brought Islam to Yoruba land. Okay, it was actually the Malians. Because of the law for education that the Yorubas had, there was a university in Timbuktu, and they know the value of education. So the Yoruba merchants were sending their children to the university in Timbuktu, in Mali. And when they come back home, they had a different religion, which was Islam. So when they referred to them, and the way they dressed became different. They were dressing like the way they dressed in Mali in their own that time. So to identify them, they said, and when let's see in Mali, the followers of the religion of Mali. So it was Mali that became Imali and became Imali. So, and those that are called Elesi Imali were Muslim Yorubas. So in the revolt in Brazil, the Imali revolt was actually a revolt by the Yoruba Muslims in Brazil that time. Because the origin of that word Imali or Malay was actually from Yoruba land here. So it was possible that some of the people they were captured were already Muslims here before they were even taken down to that place.
Anything.
Africans did not gain anything from the transatlantic slave trade.
Right.
Nigeria did not benefit anything from the transatlantic slave trade. Benin Republic did not benefit anything. Togo did not benefit. Ghana did not benefit. Angola did not benefit. Senegal, no African nation benefited from the transatlantic slave trade.
Right.
If you go to Ghana, what you see are the forts and the castles
Right.
that have no direct benefit to the people, except the tourism potentials that it has now.
And
there are more people in diaspora who really want to come to Nigeria, and we have to encourage them. We're
Correct.
promoting Nigeria, we're promoting Benin Republic, we're promoting West Africa, because a lot of our people were actually taken from this coast.
Correct.
And I like to talk about Angola too, because a lot of them were also taken from those places. But our people, they were taken away. We really need to reconnect them with the motherland, because this is actually their home. It is important.
Right.
South Carolina, let's be specific, South Carolina. When you go to South Carolina, you understand, South Carolina is very similar to Africa. A lot of people were taken from Sierra Leone to South Carolina and other parts in West Africa to South Carolina, and they were skilled. In their previous country, they were planting rice. So some of those people they were taken from here, it was a skill. They became, now such people they were enslaved became very, very expensive. They already have a skill here. So when they take them to the Americas, for example, someone that is already a rice planter here, when they take them to the Americas, selling them in the auction block in places like Charleston or in South Carolina, where they have water and they have planters, they were planting rice in those areas, so they become expensive because you don't really have to train them. They already have the skill. In Louisiana, there are places that you go to in Louisiana, the balcony were made of iron, different designs of iron in the balcony. Now, people who made that there, those guys already have the skill of blacksmith here in Africa before they were taken there. So when they take such people to the auction block, they become expensive. But meanwhile, they are taking the human resources of Africa to the Americas. So why taking them away? Nobody is developing Africa. Africa remains redundant. They are developing the Americas. They developed Europe because we know the truth of the events that take place. Whatever the conspiracy against us and our cousins in diaspora, whatever it is, it won't work because the evidences are there. We are the same. The history is there. They are trying to change the history. No, I am not an Israelite. I'm a Yoruba man from Africa. Yes, I'm an African.
We are in the slave house of Togo, in the coastal place in West Africa coast in Togo here. Okay, so in the time they wanted to stop this slavery, in that moment I was saying that some of the traders who didn't want to stop came and continue here into clandestinity. So in that moment when they came on the place, they have settled this building in the middle of a great forest. So from here to the seashore in that moment was about 1.5 kilometers. In that moment, the slave traders, when they arrive for taking slave from here, they used to stay in these accommodations or rooms before they bring the slave for them from the northern part of Togo to the coastal here.
Okay.
The height of this cave is about 1.5 meters, which like the measurement of the shape of the ship. So the traders said that the slaves were learning from here how they could be in the ship during that journey. So they used to spend many weeks inside the cave until the ship arrived. And when the ship arrived, now they let them go out and take their ultimate bath before taking the ship to abroad. This place was the corridor where they used to pass before getting inside the cave. You know, when they pass by the first door outside, they used to continue to the second door inside. Okay. But most of the time, even they put ebony wood here to hide the face of the second door, so that if somebody wants to know more, they just open the first gate and let them see that they have only ebony wood inside here.
Okay. So that means the slaves were not allowed to go through here.
Yeah.
They will come through here.
Yeah.
Into the cave.
Pass, yeah, into the cave.
Wow.
Yeah.
And that's the hole into where that's the door.
Yeah.
That door is very small.
Very small. But everybody in the world can pass there. In this house, before or after the slavery, everything was done into clandestinity here. The architecture is called style Afro-Brazilian. We have the upstairs for the slave traders and the downstairs for the slaves. Down of the building is made by cave about 1.5 meters in height. This was like the measurement of the shape of the ship. Then the traders were saying the slaves were learning from here how they could be in the ship during the journey. In that moment, these traders were free in their accommodations upstairs. They have everything on their side. Their bed well dressed with a good mattress. But unfortunately, in the cave, the slave used to sleep on floor, no mat, no cloth, but every day in chain like prisoners. But sometime in the night, they pick some of the women among them for their raping all-night satisfaction. And then in the sitting room, these traders sat down, drinking, eating, and discussion. But in the same way, under their feet in the cave, the slaves were there and thinking about what tomorrow can be for them. And they used to gather all of these slaves in the market called the Blokoti Sime, behind the lake where they used to make their commercial activities. And after they bring the slave in the house here and force them to go by the small entrance you can see under the building. So in that moment, they used to crawl before getting inside. And when they were inside too, they could not be able to start that because of the height of this. And they used to be there for many days or many weeks until the ship arrived to take them. And when the ship was there, they took all of the slaves and let them take their last Africa or ultimate bath, like a purification bath, at the well known as Gatovdo or Chain People Well. But over there, they forced the slave to walk 7 times around this well. This was a ritual they were using to put the slave into total confusion. So in that moment, the slave cannot be able to go back home when they wanted to escape. And after they put them to the small embarkation, and from embarkation to the ship, now from the ship to the last destination.
During the Atlantic slave trade, at least 15 million Africans were uprooted from the continent to be forced into slavery in the Americas and the Caribbean. Benin saw more than 1 million people forcibly shipped out. Since the return of democracy about 30 years ago, the country's been doing more to commemorate this painful part of its history. Our team reports.
Ouidah has long kept silent. The coastal city never truly faced its past as a former slave trading port. With the end of Marxism 30 years ago, Benin began acknowledging the history of previously anonymous sites. Here, the old auction market is still named after a white Brazilian who was one of the biggest slave traders of his time. More than 1 million Africans had their liberty stripped away here. Since the 90s, the journey taken by thousands of chained Africans has been part of a historical tour. At the end of this road is a warehouse that was used to keep men and women before their departure. It was the last stop before they left their home continent forever. Jeffrey comes from a family of boatmen. His forefathers carried captives to the waiting slave ships. He often comes here to meditate.
Nous étions obligés d'amener les esclaves dans les pirogues vers les bateaux négriers, sinon on est décapité.
Many Beninese still today commemorate their ancestors. The region east of present-day Benin paid a heavy price for the transatlantic slave trade. Before being forced onto ships, most African captives would have followed the voodoo religion. Recently, some believers opened up about a secret aspect of their worship.
La tradition vaudoise choisit d'imprimer cette mémoire à travers la peau des adeptes ici. Par exemple, c'est l'ancêtre d'Arsonan qui a été déporté. Quand nous allons effectuer les cultes qu'il faut, ces adeptes pourront réciter le nom des milliers d'ancêtres qui ont été déportés et dont les noms sont imprimés sur leur corps.
The number of ceremonies evoking the memories of deported Africans have increased over the past 30 years, in part driven by tourists from the diaspora in search of their ancestral identity.
Tout Africain est né vaudou.
Every African is born voodoo. That is why our ancestors, our parents, our grandparents were taken into slavery. Now their spirits are coming back to us here.
Leurs esprits, quand on les amène là-bas, leurs esprits retournent chez nous ici.
The festival takes place at the Gate of No Return, built in memory of the millions of slaves that passed through this small coastal town. The slaves spread voodoo to the Caribbean, Brazil and the United States.
C'est à partir de Ouida que le vaudou s'est répandu.
Voodoo started in Ouida and then spread all over the world. You have to recognize that. It can't be denied. What is voodoo? It's nature, the four elements of nature, respecting them, knowing them, and respecting their principles.
Voodoo and slavery linked forever on this strip of land, where perhaps for some there's a chance to make peace with the past.
The kings of Dahomey traded a lot of slaves. Abomey has traded, from the figures we know now, not far from 1 million people.
Just from Abomey alone? Just from
Abomey alone. And you have more from the neighboring kingdoms, Savi Kingdom, for instance, Port Novo Kingdom, etc., etc.
All the way down to Lagos in Nigeria?
Yes, all the way to Lagos in Nigeria. And the cannons you can see here are the sign of the slave trade, because they would buy a cannon against 25 gentlemen.
Do the citizens of Benin today, through the schools or publicly, talk about this history of the slave trade when the people of Dahomey sold other black people to the white man and then shipped them to the New World?
We do not talk much about slave trade, slavery, because for most of Beninese people, 300 years back is a lot. Those who have been to school know about slave trade, know about what happened to their brothers sold to the New World. And a few months back, we had the bicentenary of the death of King Agonglo. And Agonglo was said to be one of the kings who tried to stop slave trade. But so, of course, he did not succeed.
But he must have known how bad it was.
Yes, he knew. They knew how bad it was. That was why they didn't trade their own people. They would trade people from the wars and battles they did all around the country. The kings of Dahomey carried a lot of war. There was almost every year a war. This image again shows you that we are dealing with Yoruba people because you can see the scars on their faces. And this gentleman has been beheaded again because, well, he lost.
But there's so many images on these panels of violence, of conquering. Was it a particularly violent kingdom?
Well, people say and pretend that it is a particularly violent kingdom, but I have not seen throughout history any conqueror not being violent. Have you ever come across someone who is conquering and is not violent?
No, generally people conquer by violence.
Okay, so that's this kingdom, they did of course cultivate the art of superiority, and each king had to train his son to be a warrior, to be someone who is greedy of power, of expanding all over.
This place is Zomayi. There was a dark room here, and those who will not go the same day will be kept here for many months while waiting for the boat.
Oh, I see.
And they'll feed them once a day, only when it's dark, because they will not see light to recognize where they are staying. It's just to keep them from running away. And to make them get used to the life in the boat.
So they would go to the bathroom here, they eat here?
Yeah, everything here. You know, there were no more human beings. They were treated like animals.
Worse?
Worse than animals. There were no more human beings. They were treated like animals.
Worse?
Worse than animals. There were no more human beings. They were treated like animals.
Worse?
Worse than animals. This is the last stop of the slaves. Actually, we call that monument the Gate of No Return.
No return.
So once they cross these gates, it's finished. The destination is the New World.
Okay, we go to the ocean where they put the slaves in the ships, but the slaves came from the interior. They were bought from the chiefs, from the kings in the interior, and the king got in return cannons and weapons. When they did not have enough chains, they cut a tree, they made a log out of it, and they cut three holes in it.
Came from.
And they put three holes, and they put the log on top of their head, so that the three stay together, walk together behind each other. How many people
were side by side?
600 walked side by side.
You know, all sorts of things happen with the slaves. They can sleep with them, they can beat them, they can do so many things there. Violence.
On peut dire l'abolition en 1848. Et en 1846, c'est le dernier bateau.
The last ship went on 1846, and it was then they don't got any other ship came in for slavery. All this, you see men and women, men and women, you know, in the forts.
They put a tattooage, they burn it in the back here. The name of the master.
When they do that, they cry, so they go now and buy some iron to close their mouths.
Close their mouths.
Yeah, that's why their mouths is...
Why?
This small house and chapel overlooking the sea formed part of Luanda's slave trade. The beautiful view contrasts starkly with the deplorable experiences that happened here. In this building, captives were converted to Christianity before being sent to meet their fate as slaves in the New World. Through baptism, the Catholic Church stripped the captives of their African identity. Those who were detained in Angola were given Portuguese Christian names. They were baptized in big groups and were renamed if and when they reached a distant shore. In 1985, Pope John Paul II asked Africans to forgive white Christians for their involvement in the slave trade. The Kwanza River, which empties into the Atlantic just south of Luanda, was an important trade route, and people who lived near its banks got swept up in the slave trade.
It was by the river where most of the slaves were captured. They were kidnapped, and it was done by the Africans as middlemen.
Hurd says slavery drained the region of precious human capital.
The workforce, the intelligentsia, the skilled people were taken from here. And today, we need this skilled workforce so that Africa can move forward to a better situation.
At the National Archive in Luanda, Januário Silva displayed manuscripts left behind that are at least 300 years old.
The name of the slave, gender, place of birth or origin, age, identifying marks, occupation. And at the end are notes where we can see the date of capture or other relevant information.
The ledgers also contain letters and other correspondence.
This one tells us about a situation involving slaves who have run away with the help or participation of some traditional authorities.
While some tribal chiefs profited from supplying captives to the European slavers, other leaders tried to protect their people. One was Njingamband, queen of the Ndongo and Matamba kingdoms in the 17th century. A warrior and diplomat, she fended off the Portuguese and Dutch throughout her 40-year reign.
She was the greatest protector of Angolan sovereignty, and it was 40 years of fighting for a woman in the 17th century, and she didn't get killed. She would hide in these floating islands of the Kwanza River, so they could never tell where she was. She always resisted, and she always won.
But ultimately, the Portuguese slave traders prevailed. They already had taken control of parts of the region since 1482. In 1617, they founded the port city of Benguela. There, this building, which is now Angola's National Archaeology Museum, was once a way station for thousands of human captives, says historian and archaeologist Paula Russa.
This was a warehouse. They waited here for the slave ships coming from Europe and the Americas to take them away.
The history is painful. Like many others in Benguela, Russa is descendant from slaves.
My mom is dead. I was raised in an orphanage, but my great-aunts told me, look, your great-grandmother was sent to Recife in Brazil.
Of the nearly 11 million enslaved people shipped from Africa to the Americas, almost 6 million came from what is now Angola. Fewer than 400,000 were sent to the 13 American colonies before 1776. Historians say a tiny fraction came from Benguela.
We had many American tourists on the cruise ships that used to dock here, and they wanted to come to this specific place because they said their ancestors left from here.
Centuries of colonization and slavery scarred Angola, as did recent decades of civil war. Today, the country has the third largest economy in sub-Saharan Africa, but at least a third of its 30 million people live in poverty. That Western accounts often do not include the barbaric practices. For example, he says, after Britain abolished slavery in 1833, the trade continued illegally, and Portuguese slavers were ruthless in avoiding being caught.
A técnica usada por portugueses.
When British inspectors reached Portuguese ships, they wouldn't find any slaves. The Portuguese strategy was to throw all the black people into the sea when they spotted British ships. The Portuguese would then return to shore and pack the ship up again.
Angola's slave history has seeped into the culture, resonating in murals and music. Capoeira is a martial arts form developed by slaves. They used music to disguise self-defense moves. Justino Pinto de Andrade, known to capoeira enthusiasts as Faísca, teaches the sport and explains why it remains popular.
I think it's essentially related with the musical part. We have berimbau, for example, the atabaque and pandeiro, all of them African instruments. Capoeira, without its music, is not capoeira. It's the only martial art in the world that performs to music with instruments and chants. Music is like a stamp, it's the African's brand.
Some capoeira songs tell the stories of enslaved black people. One is Negro Inheritance, which Faísca wrote to describe their suffering.
For a man to know where he's going, he must know where he comes from, right?
Informed by the past, Faísca wants what Angola's students also say they want: to move forward.
Where our ancestors were taken to different places. Very terrible. And sometimes people normally ask this question that because the Europeans were doing business, if their motive was to gain much profit, then they should take good care of them rather than allowing them to die and so on. Is it wickedness, evil? From my point of view, the supply of the captives were more. It wasn't in scarcity. They never mind, because if they die, they'll still get some. Wow. And before the Europeans came, the Africans will have their own system of slavery. That was domestic type of slavery, or commonly known as an indentured servant, like a free man. A person who has the opportunity to own property, marry, and give birth. Unlike the chattel slavery by the Europeans, with different assets altogether. So captives of wars were given out as slaves. Criminals, thieves, debtors were sold out as slaves. Some towns and villages were raided by the Europeans. Some chiefs collaborated to exchange some of their servants. But my question is, let's ask ourselves frankly, has it really stopped as of now?
Work for white people on life, never go home. That's why some slaves get freedom, but they still die.
How did the slaves end up on the island?
They're born here.
How did the slaves arrive to the island? How did they get here?
Yeah, they arrive here by the Europeans, because the Europeans, they go to the coast.
Okay.
Bring slaves here.
Okay.
Yeah, sometimes they organize kidnapping.
Right.
To keep Africans, put them on the boat and bring them here.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But if you ask the Europeans say,
they will say that we sold ourselves to slavery. Like
Yeah.
the kings and chiefs, African chiefs, will sell us into slavery.
that's not right.
No, I know.
Good.
That's what they do to try to justify slavery.
It's like sand for the man. This one is like for the children. 7 to 12 years children.
Okay.
Here.
Okay.
Not medical assistant, also like same.
Okay.
Every day the master here touch about the bodies to check the body temperature.
Okay.
When they see, they throw them out for shots.
Okay.
So here, children not.
Oh, when you say throw them out, I thought you were saying the sharks. They'll throw them to the sharks.
Yeah.
Into the water.
Yeah.
Man, this beast. Go ahead.
All slaves, when they sick, they throw them over there.
Uh-huh.
So that's why the many died. Even here, the children have no clothes, nothing.
Uh-huh.
So every day they come to touch that boys to check the body temperature.
Right.
You see, so the children here cry every day, ask mama. They call mom for the different language.
Right.
Mom on day, mom, but Europeans say never mind.
Right.
They don't mind family.
Right.
For the Europeans, they are slaves, finished. When they send into camp, sometimes they separate them.
Right.
See, that's why so many died here.
Wow.
50%.
Wow.
So sometimes the buyers and sellers stay here. Sometimes they talk about the strong, because they have to touch the slaves.
Right.
The strong men, they are expensive slaves.
Right.
They are best ones. Because they use all the slaves, like the men and women, to make him reproduction.
Yes.
On the plantation to get strong and tall slaves.
Right.
Yeah, reproduction. In general, they use some tribals like from West Africa and tribals, West African tribals. They are strong. They are strong tribals like from Nigeria.
Right.
Some tribals we call Yoruba, and from Benin. Yeah, and also in Mali. There are another tribals we call Bambara.
Bambara, yeah.
Bambara.
I'm going to Mali tomorrow.
Bambara, and they are tall, strong men.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, in Senegal.
Yes.
Yeah, sometimes the Europeans use that tribals to make reproduction.
Uh-huh.
3 in this side and 2 at the other side. Okay. But as you can see, this cell was for 15 or 20%. Come look inside, please. This cell was for 15 or 20%. They will sit all around the wall. And they will free 1 time a day to go to the bathroom. Before that, or after that, the man who have a diarrhea, they want to vomit, urinate. Like all natural needed, they was obliged to do that here. Everything to do everything, all natural needed, they was obliged to do that here. And this place was not cement before, it was like a sludge, the mud. And the men was just put something like hide sex to hide the private part. And with the time, they stay naked. And they used to sell them naked. Because before sell them, they just spray them the seawater and put them the ship butter to make them shining. And they bring to the different places to exchange them. And the door and the windows was closed with an iron bar like a jail.
Chill. So you can never go outside?
No. Only if the merchant want to bring them outside. They was obliged to stay here for 15 or 20%, and the slave will stay here 3 or 6 months to wait for the boat. Because they would catch the slave in the different countries like Gulf of Guinea, Cameroon, Ghana, Benin, Togo, Ivory Coast, Gulf of Guinea, Nigeria, Mozambique, Gambia. But here was the last destination in West African coast before leave Africa definitively, and it was the first destination in West African coast before go to the different countries. And the slave trade was started in this island in 1536. 36. Or the slave trade was started in other country in Lagos by the Portuguese in 1441. It was before discovering America. Because they say America was discovered in 1492, or the slave trade was started in 1441, and the destination was Europe before, like Lisbon, Cadiz, London, Liverpool, Amsterdam. It was Africa and Europe before.
So people, they were bringing people here saying that they were coming to give them jobs. Yeah, people came and as soon as they come, they just... Yeah, they capture.
So they come here, the bargain price.
So these are the things that they exchange slaves for: guns, gunpowder, sugar, iron, rice, salt, cutlass, mirrors, shoes, beer, clothes, walking sticks,
that's ridiculous.
brandy, bicycles, perfume, cotton, tobacco, pipes, jewelry, brass pans, cigars, cooking pots, sunglasses, bar soaps, stockfish, beads, and that's in French.
That's when they That's their arrival.
This is where they took them?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Oh, and they stopped there to get more slaves.
Mm-hmm.
Cuba.
No, they take them there.
Oh, they were slaves there in this place.
They're taking them there. Yes, disembarkation. That's when you disembark.
So they're Africans who are Jamaicans. They say they're not from Africa. You see Jamaica?
Yeah, even Brazil now, but most.
Yeah, but they say Jamaicans and island people, they really, when they talk about being African, some from the islands. But they took them there.
Some of you went to Sierra Leone. Brazil, Caribbean.
Grenada, and Cuba, that's why there's a lot of blacks in
yeah.
Cuba.
Wow. Quiet beach.
So as we approach the beach, you see that island? That's called Miko Island. Miko Island was a place where they took slaves to keep them because they knew that they couldn't swim. So they would keep them there in order to, pretty much that was like a jail for them. Because obviously if they can't swim, that's perfect. So they keep them there and then they bring their ships and take them from Miko Island.
Bimbia is a remote locality situated about 11 kilometers from Limbe in the southwest region of Cameroon. Some 3 centuries ago, Bimbia was apparently more prominent than Limbe city. It was from here that a substantial number of slaves from Cameroon were shipped to the Americas during the transatlantic slave trade. Though in ruins, this over a century-old slave market still has vestiges that can be used to tell the story to future generations. The door of no returns still stands tall as no slave returned after passing through it.
An island in the Gambian River. These days, an attraction for determined tourists. In days gone by, though, a prison. Once known as James Island, it later became known as Slave Island, the place where people were held before they were shipped across the Atlantic. Now the dozens of men, women and children captured from the neighboring villages were then held in such small cells for about 2 to 3 weeks before being transported to what was called the New World. Now these were plantations in America. To the slave buyers, the location of the island was strategic since it ensured the families of those missing would not be able to find them.
It's navigable right from Banjul up to the end of the country. So this is one reason why it becomes a so much focus area for the Europeans.
The island is a World Heritage Site. It's recently been renamed Kunta Kinte Island after a real-life Gambian slave profiled in the American novel Roots. Gambia is making much of the Kunta Kinte link. This, locals tell us, was his home.
Yes, they live from hand to mouth.
This woman, one of his descendants.
At the age of 18, he went to bush with his friend to collect a firewood for his mother, and they came across with the Portuguese. All the friends ran away. They told Kunta to run. He said he didn't want to run. He wanted to know their mission and what type of human being they are. As you all know, one man cannot fight a dozen. Later he fought against them, and Kunta Kinte was overpowered.
The migration of Fullers from Futa Jalon and the establishment of Futa Imamate in the 17th century coincided with the transatlantic slave trading system that legitimized Futa to have control over the existing trade routes. The participation of Futa in the transatlantic slave trading system made Futa to assume an active role in the global economic system from the latter part of 18th century up to the middle of the 19th century.
The name Futa Jalon came from its early Jalinke inhabitants. The region was first organized as a separate political entity as a result of the Fulbe and the Malika Jihad led by Karamoko Alpha and Ibrahim Osori in the late 1720s. Throughout the 19th century, the powerful Alpha of Labe organized regular slave raids against isolated communities in the area from Nyokolo all the way to Upper Gambia. At a very early stage, following the effective occupation of Rio Nones and Rio Pongo by the French, Labe province and the Fouta-Djallon regime in general became primarily interested in controlling the coastal region between Rio Nones and Rio Jeba.
Following the abolition of transatlantic slave trading system, in which Fouta Imamate was a dominant force. However, with the emergence of legitimate trading system in which Kabu was benefiting, Fouta Imamate was determined to challenge the power of Kabu in order to connect itself to Foria, Nyokolo region, and Upper Gambian Valley.
We are very privileged to be with you, particularly our brothers and sisters from the Caribbean and the diaspora. And people from all over Africa, our brothers and sisters from all over Africa. I wish at this point to particularly to apologize deeply on behalf of the chiefs and people of Gold Coast and Ghana for the atrocities, the cruelty, the inhuman treatment that were committed 400 years ago by my ancestors during the Atlantic slave trade, where over 400 years ago, millions of our brothers and sisters were captured, sold, and transported under inhumane and cruel circumstances through Elmina Castle across to the Caribbean and to the New World. On behalf of the chiefs and people of Ghana, I do render unqualified apology, deep from the bottom of our hearts. Deep from our bottom of our hearts. But one thing that I want you to be aware of, it was not without resistance. Some of our chiefs did fought and resisted. Some of our people did fought and resisted. But we are fighting a losing battle against a stronger army. People with guns, and we had no guns. They deceived us with liquor and all other temptations. Whatever the circumstances that led it to us, we stand here to render apology.
When the slaves got here, they never knew where they were going. Neither did they know what was going to happen to them. All they knew was to get out of this room onto the boats. Some actually committed suicide because that was the only way they thought they could get their freedom. In fact, it was the Africans who did the raiding and selling of Africans to the Europeans. No European ever went into the hinterland to raid for slaves. It was the Africans who did it. No European ever went into the hinterland to raid for slaves. It was the Africans who did it. No European ever went into the hinterland to raid for slaves. It was the Africans who did it. And before the Europeans even landed here, slavery was already in the system. It was slaves that worked in the palaces for the kings. This is where they slept, yes. But the place was much overcrowded. So there wasn't enough space for one even to lie down. The result was an outbreak of malaria and yellow fever. So by the time the ships arrived, more than half were already dead.
The Europeans came to Africa in the 15th century. And when they arrived, they found a well-knit political system in Africa.
A well-made political system?
Yes, well-knit political system. In other words, they were centralized state with kings, chiefs, well-established political systems. They also found that there was a well-established economic system in terms of trading and so on. And so they recognized who the Africans were. And they found strong states, kings who were ready to negotiate with them on equal basis and partnership basis, both in their trade and so on. And in fact, when the Europeans started building the forts and castles, they asked permission from the kings to build their land, to build the forts, and then they paid rent for the forts. So they needed, as it were, the Africans to agree on equal basis or partnership basis to enslave their fellow Africans.
So if Africans had not sold other Africans to the Europeans, there wouldn't have been a slave trade?
I think so, because the Africans were strong enough. If they had said no, perhaps the Europeans themselves would have tried to go inland, and that would have been very, very difficult.
The whole slavery episode was an unfortunate era in the history of Africa, and for that matter, of Ashanti. One would say it depleted the human resources of the empire. What perhaps the empire could have achieved, was lost through this trade. So much as we, as I said, do regret, that era in our history. Perhaps it was a sign of the times, and we couldn't have done otherwise.
But do you think the Africans understood how horrible the transatlantic slave trade was?
No. I mean, I don't think they knew. I mean, if they had known, known about the horrible stories that our brothers and sisters were going through when they were being transported, not only from our coast, but through the transatlantic, through Goree, and then the transatlantic route to the States. I don't think they would have continued doing it. I mean, besides, there was no means of knowing, the, brutalities that they underwent.
Perhaps the people around the castles might have seen how horrible it was.
They might have seen some aspect of it, but those of us, that's our ancestors who were in the interior, had no means of knowing, except through a few stories.
On this historic site, there was trade of a certain kind. It was from here that the slaves of the Luango Kingdom, a state in the coast of Central Africa that was founded at the turn of 15th century and abolished in 1885, began their journey. The Luango port is located some 25 kilometers off Point Noir, the economic capital of Congo. It still has remnants vestiges that reflect the passage of millions of slaves. But now fallen into disuse, the site does not interest much world except a few curious people who come to discover the place. There was no railway, there was only the road. There were also no vehicles, so we had to trace the trail used by the caravans, which was 600 kilometers long, and it started from Brazzaville to the coast. Some of the historical relics of the slave trade at Luango did not, however, stand up to the test of time. The stele, symbolizing the departure of the caravans and the great market of all the transactions built by the explorer Pierre Sarovagnan of Brazza, has already collapsed. In this place, the enslaved slaves made 7 turns around the tree of forgetfulness for the women or the girls, and 9 turns for the men. The return tree, which symbolized a possible return of the spirit of the deceased to the country, is also no longer alive. I'm really upset because the site is abandoned. It was a place that had to be maintained to make history live. In other countries such as Senegal, the site of former slave ports is well maintained. Let's take an example of island like Goree. If you visit it, it is incomparable to what we have here. With the disappearance of these historical monuments, a part of African history has perished before the eyes of historians and those of the descendants of slaves in search of identity. The fact is bitter because the site itself is the only one, except that when people come, we see only the vegetation, which is in a deplorable state. It is hardly known by the Congolese people. Although somewhat late, a project to upgrade the former Luango slavery port is in progress to put an end to these abandoned historical relics. There is talk of building an African city of arts and memory. It is a project at the state level. This city can create open-air museums that could benefit local communities. As the African News correspondent explains, the former slave port will enable future generations to remember easily the history of...
You found out that Africans were involved as well as middlemen?
I think I was surprised and hurt and angry and everything because, these were people that, I sort of had a fantasy about them and as our ancestors, and your ancestors don't sell you. So that fantasy was sort of blown away. Sort of had a fantasy about them and as our ancestors, and your ancestors don't sell you. So that fantasy was sort of blown away. Sort of had a fantasy about them and as our ancestors, and your ancestors don't sell you. So that fantasy was sort of blown away. So that fantasy was sort of blown away. So that fantasy was sort of blown away. So that fantasy was sort of blown away.